Dale, for the audience who doesn't know who you are, tell us about yourself, your background, your education. Who is Dale Graff?
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start with the academic stuff first. I do have a background in aeronautical engineering and physics, 2 degrees. And my early professional career was with the aerospace industries. I worked on some of the early missile programs, the Titan ICBM, which became the booster for the Gemini launch vehicle. I worked on other space programs and missile programs for about 10 years. And then I transitioned into the intelligence community as an analyst and later became a manager in certain areas of intelligence analysis. And during that phase, I was actually living in Dayton, Ohio, and employed by an organization that was at that time known as the Foreign Technology Division, abbreviated as FTD in the media that happens to cover that. And after being there for about 16, 17 years, I transitioned into the Washington, D.C. area and took a position with the Defense Intelligence Agency, continuing some of that work and looking into new areas of physics. I was chief of the Advanced Concepts Office there. But during all this, in 1976, I became interested in a phenomenon known as remote viewing, which was being researched by physicists at the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. And I developed an interest in the general topic a little earlier. But in 1976, I had an opportunity to actually become a contract manager for research that the Air Force was willing to take a look at. And that's how I got into the remote viewing world. And remote viewing, for those that haven't heard the term that frequently or have different ideas of what it is, was basically a phenomenon that people at that time described as the ability that people have, some people, maybe all people, for actually perceiving information at a distance. In other words, you can sit down and relax and imagine where a friend of yours is traveling, and in the proper intentions and whatever, you would be able to perceive the environment that he or she is in and sketch it out and compare it, and later on, yeah, that's where the individual was. So it was a way of describing at that time a distant scene, geographic usually, and from that point on, the government became interested in this as a application for finding out what's going on in the Soviet Union. In the Air Force, we were interested in that, but we were also interested in what this ability is. How can you explain it? How can you replicate it? How many people, what kinds of people can do this? And what can you do with it for operational intelligence activities, like finding airplanes or fugitives or hostages? So it was this multi-pronged approach that let me stay in the field because it was really quite interesting, and it allowed me to bridge the gap between what I saw as a lot of holes in science, between physics and biology and psychology, and it was really a great place to try to integrate this varied phenomenon together.
Well, we would call this metaphysics, wouldn't we?
Yeah, that's one way of calling it. Metaphysics usually refers to the unseen, something beyond reality. But that's part of this because we don't know exactly how to explain this. And the one concept might explain it from brain processing points of view up to a point. Others might look at it from a new physics point of view. Whatever it is, there's something beyond current knowledge. So the word meta would be applicable here. So it was in these areas that brought me into the field, and I was really lucky to be able to stay with it as long as I was, from 1975 to about 1993 when I retired from the government to pick up writing and doing workshops and things like that. So that's basically my technical and professional background. I also have other interests too. You would ask me, about me. I'm also a whitewater canoeist. I like to do a lot of wilderness travel, hike around in the mountains, that sort of thing. I did grow up in a rural area in Pennsylvania, so that's sort of near the Appalachian Trail, which is very nice. In fact, I'm standing here right now looking towards the mountain where the Appalachian Trail is. So I'll be up there probably later this afternoon.
As far as you are aware of, whatever information you have, how did the government start this? Do you know any of that?
Yes, I do.
I'd love to hear about it.
Yes, I wasn't involved in the very first year or two, but I became involved after that for the next 19 years, 20 years, in the government's interest in remote viewing, its research and applications. But initially, and at that time I was with the Department of Defense, with the Air Force, and then later it was the Defense Intelligence Agency. But initially the CIA had an interest in this phenomenon because certain people claimed that they could describe these remote scenes very accurately, and this intrigued the CIA as much as later on it intrigued us. And it was in these early, the CIA came up with a small contract just to explore the potential. And it was during this time when an individual, and actually a retired police official, was able to describe very accurate scenes in the Soviet Union that were later proven to be accurate. And he also was able to identify certain project code words in a secret U.S. facility. So that really got attention, and that's how the work, the research, and the examination of remote viewing for certain applications developed, began. And that particular effort ran about a year and a half. And then the CIA dropped out because there were some political issues going on at the time in the CIA, and this was in an area which happened to be eliminated from the CIA in terms of organization structure. So at that point, the researchers were looking for funding, and this is where the organization I worked with and myself came into the picture to continue the research. So you see, it has a link with what people demonstrated in the laboratory in terms of describing these distant scenes and activities in faraway locations, including the Soviet Union. So that's basically how it began. It was an individual that claimed he could do this kind of thing, tested in the laboratory. There were a few others too. The name Ingo Swan is probably familiar to many people. So between Ingo and Pat Price and a few others, the data, the remote viewing, as it was called by the researchers, and the term that's hung on ever since, was demonstrated. And these were the people that helped bring the reality and the acceptance of the terms and the phenomena.
Does the government acknowledge that this happened?
It's interesting. At this point in time, they're very quiet and not denying or affirming it. Of course, at one time, when the program was released publicly on the Nightline TV program in 1995, they had to acknowledge its existence. This appeared on national television. But beyond that, I have not seen anything from any official government sources that actually formally acknowledges the existence of it. But of course, there are many people now that once were with the program or knew something about it that are up and about doing various things related to remote viewing, giving workshops, teaching, and whatever. And of course, I do something similar through my writing in workshops, and there are other books that have come out that explain some aspect of the program, which, by the way, when I finally became involved in it from a program management point of view, many years after I became involved in it as the liaison or as connected in some other capacity, when I became the program manager, the manager of the unit, where we had remote viewers at Fort Meade, Maryland. I was able to alter the name of the program. I came up with the name Stargate to symbolize something that's far-reaching as in terms of human potential, and it's a name that has stuck. But it was not the initial code words of the project, which were the typical government gobbledygook kind of words.
And clearly, the name Stargate has nothing to do with the Stargate that we've seen in the field.
You know, that's an interesting question. And this is why another area of my investigations involves a phenomenon called synchronicity. When I came up with that term, and of course this was debated in the group, the Stargate unit, and at that time we did have military and civilian people that were, say, trained to do remote viewing in a location in Fort Meade, Maryland. And at the time, I actually was transferred. But anyway, at that time, I thought about a good name for it, what would be symbolic, and to get away from the typical bad words or hard to pronounce words that had come along with these terms. So I came up with the term Stargate. And about a year later, here's the movie Stargate. And I had no idea that there was going to be a movie coming out with that name. So it was sort of a synchronistic thing, where the idea behind the Stargate movie and the time travel and going through that portal, you know, maybe there's a symbolic connection here. I don't know for sure. But no, I did not use anything from the media to identify or to come up with the name Stargate. That was sort of a spontaneous thing.
This synchronicity thing you're mentioning, I find this in my own life. I'll be thinking about something I haven't thought about in maybe 10 years. And then all of a sudden that same day, or maybe the next day, I'll see it on the TV, or I'll read about it in a book.
Yeah, and this is why one of the other areas that I then branched off into to spend more time examining the precognition is a term used to see incidents coming at you from the future. And I think synchronicity really is similar. And you have a feeling or a hunch or a premonition, and then this thing happens. Or we end up walking around the corner and absent-mindedly, and then we bump into someone that we were looking for at a place we didn't expect. So it was a synchronistic encounter. So it strikes me that you and I and everyone in the listening audience, everywhere, is constantly thinking or scanning the future. And occasionally we will get a glimpse of incidents coming our way, or telephones coming, or calls coming our way. And we'll become aware of them, just like a remote viewer might become aware of what the configuration is of a building 1,000 miles away when it's targeted again. So we have these constant scanning, I think. So I really do think, after looking and working in the field of remote viewing for all these years, that there is a connection between remote viewing as we defined it in the laboratory and what people describe and experience as precognition. That is, the sense of knowing something in the future, or a premonition, or perceiving something in the mail or a telephone call that's about to happen. So I think what this says is that our minds, our brains, are actually looking ahead. I just don't mean up the street. I mean psychically, or through our psychic talents, our abilities, which we all have. And occasionally something will break through, and we'll get that feeling, that sense. Hey, there really is something coming my way, and sure enough, around the corner, there it is. So I believe we all have this ability, and a term that's usually used for this sort of event, when you have an important coincidence happen. It's usually called a coincidence, but it's really not a total coincidence. There are psychic factors involved. And I think it's because our subconscious mind has sensed this and presented it to us in a conscious way. Even though there are times we are not aware of how we did that, it still happens. And also, this is the first time I've used the word psi. I want to explain that, PSI. It's a research term that was coined half a century ago, or maybe longer, to actually 100 years ago, to indicate this general phenomenon. And it doesn't make a conclusion. It doesn't give an indication. The term doesn't give an indication of what causes it. So it's sort of a neutral term. So all phenomenon that might have the label of psychic phenomenon, or remote viewing, or ESP, or telepathy would be included in that term, PSI. So I may use the term psi occasionally, because that's sort of the research lingo for talking about paranormal psychic effects.
Is the common experience of deja vu the same as synchronicity?
I think it is. And of course, in the formal psychology groups, they'll say, well, it was just a trick of the memory. Mm-hmm. And it may be that maybe there are times when we saw something subliminally, and then a little later, there it is, and we say, oh, there's that new thing. You know, I saw it before, but I can't remember where. So there could be times when it really is a playback of memory from, say, subliminal perception. But there's enough times that I've experienced personally, and what I've heard other people have, where this can't be the explanation. So it appears that is coming from some external source. I'll say it's from our remote viewing or psychic senses. And occasionally we may even have a dream about this that we forget about or don't remember in the morning. And there's that scene that was in the dream. We don't quite remember it, but once we see that scene later on, we'll say, well, I saw this before. I don't know where. It's a deja vu. So there are these types of connections that add to what I think is a broader way of looking at deja vu that includes psi sensitivities, and it can be experienced in the awake state through this aha, hey, I saw this before, or through the dream state, and vaguely remembered or not remembered at all, and there's the scene we dreamt about. So that's one way in which deja vu, I think, is experienced and manifested. And I also think that a lot of people have these experiences. They don't openly talk about them. And synchronicity is an even stronger effect. And some of the coincidences, which is a term that's generally used, people don't understand or don't use or not familiar with the term synchronicity, which is basically a definition that means a meaningful coincidence. We have many coincidences that are not particularly meaningful to us. They just happen. But in terms of the synchronicity version of coincidence, the experience does have a lot of meaning to us, very significant, might even be life-saving. And a good example would be somebody sitting on a airplane, traveling somewhere, and happens to talk with a seat companion idly, and finds out that individual has very important information, either from a health issue or for some other research point of view the individual was looking into, or some personal issue. So why did that seat arrangement end up like that? Was this another way in which synchronicity occurs? Sometimes people that are looking, say, for roots, for their biological sources, or people searching for a missing individual, will have experiences that are so far beyond what an ordinary chance could have brought into the picture that they have to assume that there was some kind of connection going on, some kind of subconscious connection that drew them into the right place at the right time. So I think, a subconscious dynamic that happens, and that synchronicity actually uses everything, every mode of perception that we have, no matter what we call it. Call it remote viewing, call it ESP, call it telepathy, precognition. All these come together to help bring about a very meaningful coincidence that many times is so beyond belief that even the individual having them has a hard time believing it. And sometimes these experiences are actually rather awful in terms of AWE. Yeah, the people feel that there was something really unusual or something extra, metaphysical, if you will, or even sometimes spiritual going on that brought the incidents together like.
At times it almost sounds like divine intervention. I think some people would perceive it that way.
Some people do perceive it that way. And others that have these profound experiences, they might consider that as a possible explanation, or they might look at it from the point of view, well, it happened to me. I'm not especially a spiritual or religious person, therefore it must be something else. Well, nobody can make a judgment as to what this is. There's something at a subconscious level that does seem to enter into the picture. Now, I don't know what to call that. Is it an oversoul? Is it a higher consciousness? Or is it something that you mentioned, some kind of divine intervention? All these terms can relate, but there are times when synchronicities are not necessarily for anything really profound, so they're very simple things, and it's difficult to see why that would be a divine thing. So there's somewhere between the really powerful experiences and the relatively mundane coincidences. There's a phenomenon, and how it interrelates with reality and the brain-mind. We're still struggling with even the beginning of an idea.
Dale, we'll have to take a break. We'll resume this conversation in 2 minutes.
We're back with Dale Graff. Dale, one thing I'm noticing is you've made a lot of observations, but far fewer determinations.
That's correct. Yeah, and but the determination, the way you mean, let me try to see it how you mean that.
Sure.
By determination, I'm assuming you mean something like an explanation, something that might put that in some context that we might understand, either from experience or from the sciences,
Right.
or what causes the effect.
Right. Through all this research, I don't think you've come to any conclusions. Not something that you can stamp on the documents and say, hey, this is exactly what it is. We know what it is. We've solved it.
No, I'm basically an empiricist. I look at the data and say, yeah, there's a correlation. There's really something here that is not explainable by conventional science the way we understand it, and go from there. And when you think about it, natural science and physics and anything connected is really based on observation, and of course theory, where you can then look for new observation. But the constructs come out of our own cognition. They're based on a reference to what we use to measure and our own understanding, by and large. So a determination, an understanding in this field actually pushes beyond that. There's nothing really clear that would allow me to say, hey, this is how it works. However, I do have some concepts which might be in that direction. And again, I have to say, I'm reverting back to a physics background here, which may not be correct, but it's where I'm coming from. And because at one time I did some work with lasers and understand holograms and the amazing information storage ability that holograms can provide, I'm beginning to wonder if somehow behind the universe, let's use the language from some mathematicians in some alternative dimension, if you will, that there's something like a world hologram or a mind hologram, a collective unconscious, something where all knowledge that you and I and everybody else has it doesn't go away. It's stored there, like in a cosmic hologram. Again, I'm using words which make sense to me, and it may not make sense to some others.
Yeah, I think matrix might be a common term for this as well.
Yeah, right. And we're all familiar now with the hologram. Back in 1959, when it was first developed, nobody knew what a hologram was, let alone lasers. So we're more familiar with this now, and it's commonplace. Just like the internet is becoming so commonplace And cyberspace is, to many, really a mystery how that really functions. And it is rather a surprising feature that we have developed. But the conceptual analogy is there. Look at cyberspace, the incredible amount of information. You hit the button and instantly here comes the reply, whatever the query was. It's amazing stuff. So the hologram and something like cyberspace give us a concept, and that, in my mind, suggests that consciousness or unconsciousness, that there is something collective, and that phenomenon like psi and ESP and remote viewing and synchronicity somehow link with this collective knowledge, this collective database, if you will. Database is sort of a weak word, but I'll use it. And that it's in this unseen domain. The domain itself is unseen, just like in a way gravity is unseen until we drop something. But the mind has somehow evolved to find a way to access it. And this is what I'm now envisioning, sort of as a not really a determination, but as something that makes a little bit of sense. And then in certain aspects, areas of the mind, when we're so attuned, if you will, and not let all the noise, the environment that we're in, and our expectations get in the way, that we can actually link with this. Now, how that link occurs is another mystery. But the point is, we've linked with an information source that's not within our own brain, but it may be within. It has to be within what we can call the mind. The brain and the mind, in my view, are not the same. Years ago, I would have laughed at what I just said, and neuroscientists probably will take huge exception to what I just said. But the brain is not all. The mind is not all in the brain, and whatever the mind is, which is can almost be another abstract concept here. It's this feature somewhere between the mind-brain connection that is what opens up and allows anyone actually to tap into this holograph, this global hologram, or this world matrix, or whatever word you want. And of course, science fiction sometimes uses words like this to become comfortable in the general public, and they make subjective sense. We can't prove them, but they make subjective sense. So I think this is sort of what's happening. And the data, because I'm an empiricist, I can at least take a few steps and say that the data, the results of the experiences, not just myself, but many people that I've worked with and read about and studied and that have been looked at and experimented, or not experimented with, but researched in laboratory environments, where you can really control conditions and prove that the effect, at least within some statistical level of probability, in fact, did occur. So it's there, and it's all over. It's a universal phenomenon that we are immersed in. And some people use the term field, that we're in some kind of consciousness field. Well, field is a term from physics, because at one point gravity was thought to be a field. And in fact, when the term gravity was coined by Isaac Newton back in the 1600s, whatever, people accused him of being an occultist, coming up with mystical words. Because now we use the term gravity without being concerned about whether they're mystical or not. So another term from physics that I like to think about, another findings, really not a term per se, a concept, and that's a word that's being, you probably heard about, non-locality, non-local phenomenon.
Right.
And this is an interesting event, and in fact, and it's not that old. Only about 1980 was it actually demonstrated as a real phenomenon, even though the theory was around 40 or 50 years. That certain elementary particles, when they have a particular connection in the language of quantum physics, they're coupled in some way. And you move one of them it doesn't matter where you move it to, the far end of the universe, and you twist the other one. In principle, according to theory, the other one will respond instantly. So this is this non-local kind of connection that exists in quantum physics, and is a real phenomenon. Future computers
quantum entanglement?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Another term used for the same thing is quantum entanglement, and I like the term also because it suggests there is really an interrelationship. Something becomes mixed together, and not necessarily tangled up like we think about a ball of strings being knotted and tangled, but more connected. Connected is the way through some process we don't really understand.
The Heisenberg uncertainty principle somewhat proves this, anyhow.
Yeah, well, Heisenberg is sort of putting limits on things. You can't get if you start measuring something, the more accurate you want to be in one area, the less accurate you'll be in the other. But again,
but that implies a relationship between the two.
Yes, it does.
Hence the entanglement.
Yeah, I think it does. I haven't thought about it from the Heisenberg point of view so much. But the entanglement is almost more of a statistical connection, and Heisenberg's principle is looking more at energy level and interference things. But whatever the case, there is definitely a relationship because these are both coming out of quantum physics, in fact, the foundations of quantum physics. And that's why I did study quantum physics many years ago, formally in graduate school, and I have to admit, I was as taken then as I am now by some of the predictions and findings in quantum physics. So if my mind wasn't blown by ESP and remote viewing, it certainly was by quantum physics. I didn't really feel that uncomfortable about ESP and remote viewing because quantum physics is equally weird to use. And weirdness is a term that even the physicists use for this phenomenon.
Should we be educating children about ESP and remote viewing?
I think we should, but
are people ignorant or are people suppressed?
It depends. In some areas it is suppressed, and you do run into conflicts with some social and even religious backgrounds here. In some of my workshops, people that show up certainly have an interest in the topic, but when I get into it, I find that there was a lot of soul searching because of something they had to come to grips with from what they were taught as children. But in other areas, individuals are relatively open, and it may well have been the grandmother had this foresight ability or premonition ability, so they were comfortable from the cultural family point of view. And now, of course, with the media, I think that the time is really, really appropriate for trying to get a balanced perspective out in this whole thing. That we're not dealing with something spooky. We're dealing with something that's real, even if we don't understand it, and that it has very practical benefits. If you can have a synchronicity or a dream that gives life-saving information, I wouldn't want to turn that one because I'd be afraid of what people thought about it. I'd explore it and see how real it is and see what I can do about it. So I think the training, I don't know how we would actually train. The media has a responsibility here to present things in a balanced way. One of the problems with some of the media that I've been involved in, particularly some of the documentaries that I was part of years ago and still am occasionally, they'll always bring in a skeptic, and the skeptic, well, not always, but many times, and the skeptic is coming into the phenomenon from a point of view, he or she has got to protect his skeptical background, and will actually see nothing, find a way to argue one way or another, not proven statistically or whatever, all kinds of arguments, or even challenge the researcher, just not knowing what they were doing. So there's the problem of balance in the media, but if the phenomenon is just put on the table and say, hey, here's what happens to some people, here's some possibilities, here's how science has actually helped validate the phenomenon in some of the laboratories, parapsychology as a field has been studying this for 100 years or more. So this data exists, but it's just not that easily accessible to the general public. And I'm hoping that, and there have been some good programs up to now, and even some of the movies that come out, even though they might be twisted or distorted, at least bring an awareness to the topic. And I know at one time I was brought into making commentary on some of these movies. And even though the material was presented in an imbalanced way, it didn't bother me because I thought most people could see past that and only look for what might be the legitimate implications of it.
Different people would have different psi abilities. What would be the word for that?
Okay, I think it goes back to, I'm going to use a term from the psychological sciences here. We have different cognitive preferences. How's that one?
Okay, sure.
That means that some people are more visual oriented, and their life is more based on what they see, the visual impact of their environment. Others are more sound. That's where we have musicians come in. They hear sounds and tones. Others are maybe more intuitive and feeling related. So we have preferences, which are sort of inborn, I think. We start off that way. And even in this field, in the field of psi, which is really includes all these sensory modalities, some people will probably do better in a remote viewing approach based on the concept of perceiving images or drawing pictorial representations of a distant target. And others won't do well at all on that, and they'll be more comfortable with some overall sense or sound or feelings about that. So there are preferences here. And some people are more abstract. They'll go more, prefer the pictorial, something that's not exactly personal, something you can look at. Others are more emphatic, empathic. I got that wrong. Empathetic. They have more empathy. Let me do that one. And would end up sensing a feeling that somebody might have. Has nothing to do with the visual or with sound. It just happens to be their strength. They're more into the sensing feeling part. And there are different psychological scales that you can look at. They come out of, for those that are familiar with Myers-Briggs test inventories, there are scales from here that link in with cognitive preferences that might show how some people might be better in one kind of task or experience than the other.
I'm an INTJ.
INTJ. Okay.
Right. Introverted, intuitive, technical judging.
Yeah, you've got a good mix there. That's, yeah, you can cross over into different boundaries very easily.
Right, I can do anything, man.
Yeah, there you are.
Let me ask you, Dale. So you were the director of Project Stargate.
Yeah, toward the latter phase. This program ran for many years, so I couldn't possibly have been involved as a director for the entire duration. Okay. But toward the latter part of it, I was the director of the activity, including whatever research that we had to come up with at the time that we thought would be helpful. So yes, that's right.
Were you simply managing it, Dale, or were you involved in the experiments themselves?
Involved in the experiments from the point of view of defining and setting up the criterion and what type of experiments to proceed with. So I was involved in that. As far as being a data producer, was I a remote viewer? Officially, no, because management said I should not do both, even though I wasn't sure if I could do the other. But our perspective is that most anyone can do this given the right motivation, time, and training. But I was not a data producer, although there were times when I did have a hand in it as a sort of double check, but those are informal, can't really put much on them.
Okay.
But I did also work at the same time, which is independent of the remote viewing activities that we were sponsoring, which was basically on the assumption that you can experience this while awake. You don't need to go through any kind of altered state or use any kind of medication or whatever, or hypnosis in order to achieve a state that allows you to do remote viewing. On the other hand, I had a natural tendency to remember dreams. This goes way, way back to childhood. And I found that I could also dream distant targets. So I coined the term dream remote viewing as a parallel to the conscious state remote viewing that's become more popular in the press.
Dale, you're touching on a subject that I want to spend some significant time on. So
okay, great.
We'll take a break, and we'll come back, and during the next segment, we'll talk about lucid dreaming, astral projection.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll be back in 2 minutes with Dale Graff. We're back with Dale Graff. We're going to talk about lucid dreaming. I kind of cut you off during the last segment. Tell the audience all about it. I'm very interested.
Okay, lucid dreaming. Yes, I guess I'll have to admit some of my earliest recollections from childhood are dreams. And they actually were lucid dreaming, even though I didn't know the terminology at the time. And lucid dreaming is a term that's used to whenever you become aware in a dream that you really are dreaming, then you are awake in the dream. Turn lucid, become lucid in the dream. So a lot of people can have this happen spontaneously. So it's not a new phenomenon. The term's been around for a century or more. And in the 80s, there was a researcher at Stanford University, in fact, Stephen LaBerge, who's written a book on lucid dreaming from his research in the sleep laboratory that actually demonstrated that lucid dreaming is a real phenomenon. People could actually signal with eye movement when they were sleeping in lucid dreams, and like a Morse code signal to the investigator in the laboratory. So there was that connection made between conscious control of eye movement and dreaming to prove in the laboratory that lucid dreaming was real. And so it's taken off from there, and there are quite a few groups around now that actually have focused on lucid dreaming. I'm a member of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, and this is one of their main focuses is to look at the ability that anybody can experience and become lucid and become aware that you're dreaming. And of course, there seems to be a spectrum here. And there's still some debate as to where that line is to be drawn, if at all, between experiences that you might have heard about or read about or even experienced yourself to some degree, where people find themselves, say, in a hospital situation, and all of a sudden on top of the ceiling looking down during the operation, or somebody has a heart attack and follows the ambulance along from a position of view above the ambulance or side of it. So this projection ability, some people even call that astral projection. But there appears to be a link, or at least some association, between some levels of lucid dreaming and this more realistic experience that people would call astral projection. And I don't know exactly where that line should be drawn, and maybe there is a distinct difference. But from my point of view, I consider it just one general phenomenon. And when we are asleep and dreaming, or when we are in some altered state, sometimes induced by an accident, we'll drift into it automatically. And suddenly, I've talked to people who were in accidents, and they said it's really an amazing thing to find themselves standing outside of the crumbled car, looking at the wreck. So, yeah, it's a really a shocking experience if you're not familiar with lucid dreaming or this type of experience from either your readings or whatever. So I do see there's a link in that with a proper focus and intent, you can actually experience lucid dreaming. That is, become lucid when you're sleeping, almost any time that you want to. And when you do this, then there are some options that you have. You can explore this dream-like environment, this dream theater of the mind, which is filled with a lot of imaginings and fantasies, and it also has a lot of reality to it, too.
Now, I think we've all experienced that moment in a dream where you realize that you're in a dream.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, I've found that there are times, once I've made that connection, that I can keep dreaming for a little while longer and control it. But generally, I wake up, it seems to be within 30 seconds.
Yeah, now that happens. Yeah, that's a common experience. But as you get more practice at it, it seems to be a certain degree of balance here. If you become too focused in it.
Well, I guess I'm asking you, why do you wake up once you've realized that you're in a dream?
I'm not sure. I think it's a surprise. You say, my goodness, I'm dreaming. How can this be? So it's more of a surprise, a shock. And you start thinking too much. There's maybe an energy focus. You're placing too much energy or attention to the fact that you're dreaming, rather than just saying, okay, I'm dreaming, let's see where it goes. But with practice, you can actually eliminate this quick wake-up, as I call it. And sometimes we actually have a false wake-up. We'll wake up thinking we actually are awake from the dream, when we actually just slip into another dream, another lucid dream. That's another phenomenon. But I think the issue of not being able to keep in the lucid dream is that we don't have enough practice with it, or we've come too focused on the fact that we're really in a dream, like a shock effect. So with practice, we can minimize that and say, okay, you might even have the suggestion before you go to sleep, if you're seeking a lucid dream that night, to actually add the suggestion to your intention. Now, whenever I become lucid, I want to remain lucid and do whatever object you want to do, or explore, or whatever you want to hope to accomplish in a lucid dream. So I think if you include that as part of the intention, and again, I'm talking about the lucid dreams that result in a focus and intent before you go to sleep. Many times, spontaneous lucid dreams occur. And then, of course, those tend to be kind of brief because, like you experienced, after a while, or after a short while, you're just surprised out of it. But you can remain in the lucid dream longer, and then you can explore certain things. In fact, I know people that have used the mode of lucid dreaming once you get into it, to actually become proficient, to practice a proficiency in something. I'm aware of research with swimmers where the individual had a group of Olympic swimmers that once they be able to achieve lucid dreaming, then continued practicing the swimming technique in the lucid dream. And then this was compared to a control group where they randomly selected a number from each group. And this group then did not do the lucid dreaming. They just practiced as they ordinarily did. And then later, months later, the competition came, and it was found statistically, with statistical significant results, that those that had practiced lucid dreaming swimming did better. So I'm just citing this as one example of what you can do with lucid dreaming. An area which I think is very useful, very practical, is actually habit breaking. If you want to quit smoking, I would say, to those that are smoking and have trouble dropping it, that there's ways of getting into a lucid dream where the lucid dream will help you overcome the addiction. So, or healing in general. I'm aware of individuals that have facilitated a solid rate of recovery from illness or injury when they achieved a lucid dream and imagined some healing process to then be added to their situation, so that it would accelerate the recovery with success. So somehow or another, there's a direct interaction between the brain and our immune system, which includes our healing ability.
I've heard that
Yeah.
the sensation of falling that sometimes people get when they fall asleep,
Yeah.
and then they suddenly wake up,
Yeah.
that's due to the astral self going a little bit out of sync with the physical body.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it would be, but it is whatever our dream body is, whatever our dream mind is. Somehow we shift in our level, our mode of awareness to something else, some other plane, if you will, or some other aspect of the brain. Mm-hmm. But falling is not an uncommon theme in many people, or it frightens people, and then they wake up. But I would think that if you continue holding on to the falling sensation, it's just another way of entering lucidity. And then you're there. You're in a dream landscape, wherever that is, whatever that is. There are names you can give it. I'm a very general individual on naming things. I would just call it the dream theater of the mind. And it can be a vivid three-dimensional place. It can be maybe not that vivid, but just some kind of vague blackness. I've heard a lot of, and haven't had this experience myself, but you're just sort of floating in kind of a blackness. You know you're lucid, you know you're dreaming, you know you're asleep, but there's nothing specific that you can cling to. Just a sensation of being somewhere, somewhere else, wherever consciousness, wherever that point we call consciousness happened to go to. We don't know exactly what consciousness is. So there are many concepts and many models that we can't say are not correct. Any one of these could be. And maybe we still don't have the right picture of what's going on. And then later on, as more people have these experiences, maybe there will be a better consensus. But I think lucid dreaming will become more commonly known, and I think when that happens, there'll be because of the overlap with psi in lucid dreaming. I've done experiments in lucid dreaming and in psi projects, remote viewing projects, with success. So it's another way of accessing that remote.
Very popular movie, Inception.
Yeah,
sort of deals with this topic.
Oh, I tell you, Inception is a mind blower. I have to admit, I had to see it 3 times. But the first time I made a mistake. I went into IMAX, and the visual and the sound effects was just too much. I had sensory overload. And so I had to come back the second time and pay more attention to it, and the third time to look for the pieces I had missed and fill them in. But there was a situation in Inception where they really took lucid dreaming to the ultimate. And I'm not sure I can go along with some of their conceptualizing on that one. But it did open up the possibility of, lucid dreams are real. I'm not sure you can do what the movie did with them. But it was interesting because some of the structures in the Inception are very much sometimes the kinds of things you run into in lucid dreaming. They're there, then they're gone. They just dissolve, and they're not there. It's almost like a holographic projection is happening, our subconscious mind, and these images just pop in and out whenever we want to shift somewhere else. We're there. So it's really the movie. I thought, even though it really pressed the reality of lucid dreaming a bit too much, especially about the interaction. But it did open up the concept that these experiences may happen or do happen, and it's just another one of those areas that I think can be researched. And lucid dreaming opens up so many avenues. It's not just the traditional psi or ESP or remote viewing thing, or the fantasy excursion into some kind of Harry Potter land. It's far more than that. It can be a very creative endeavor, experience. It can be healing. There definitely can be spiritual aspects to this for those that are inclined to explore that dimension of reality. And I can see that. I think there is such a dimension, and lucid dreaming is a way of maybe becoming more directly connected with that for those that want to move in that direction. So there's a lot of potential in terms of an individual's own experience and learning for lucid dreaming, and it can be very practical too. I mentioned just a few here of proficiency, development, enhancement, training, and healing, and also insight into situations. You may have a replica of a situation that you need to work on in lucid dreaming, and overcome something or to adjust to something. So there's so many possibilities here. It's a big area, a big topic to get into. But I'm not a consistent lucid dreamer. They do happen to me, sometimes more spontaneously. One time I was more diligent in my pursuit of them. But when needs come up, I'll see if a lucid dream perspective can be useful and helpful. But it's just another one of those potentials that we have.
Can diet make a difference? Megadosing in ginkgo biloba or gochu kola, can these help?
I've heard that certain supplements can induce lucid dreaming or make it easier for people to have them. I have not explored that, but I know Stephen LaBerge has studied that, and he finds that there really is a compound that can help individuals achieve them quicker or easier. So I don't doubt that. But it's always a trade-off between, do you want to use the supplement or do you want to spend more time exploring it at your own pace? Because eventually your body will be developing whatever it is that needs to be added or taken away from your brain neurophysiology. And of course, we dream when we reduce certain things or add certain things. So there's kind of like a gate there that regulates whether we remember dreaming. We'll always be dreaming, that's a given. We may not very often remember them. But the remembering of dreams can be controlled by a substance in the body that's produced in the body. And then the intention to remember dreams is simply blocks some of the inhibitors. So it's a natural process that happens in the brain, controlled by intention, by volition. And lucid dreaming would be similar to that.
Have you seen the movie Men Who Stare at Goats?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it after the break.
Sure, great.
Okay, we'll be back with Dale Graff. We're back with Dale Graff. Dale, you were the director of Project Stargate, which
for the last few years. Yes.
Right, and you were involved in the projects from 1975 to 1993.
Right, in different capacities. That's correct.
Right, and you were at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and also in Washington, D.C.
That's correct.
Can you tell us about some of the more interesting things that you have witnessed or documented in your research?
Yes. There were two parts to this.
And I'll add another part to this is what I did mention, the Men Who Stare at Goats, which was based on your research, based on what you guys
Let me go into that.
Yes.
Okay.
So what's real? What isn't real? What have you seen?
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, let me start with the Men Who Stare at Goats. And when that movie came out, there was a lot of publicity, and there was a link made between the storyline and some of the activities in that movie and what we were doing on the Stargate program. And so I had to go to that movie and take a look to see what was going on. And I have to admit, there's very little resemblance between reality and what we did and what was presented in the movie. One of the biggest problem was it linked two things together that were not connected in reality. It tied in some activity and interest from the martial arts, from another element of the military, with some of the things that we looked at in the remote viewing program. It had a few things in there that tracked reality, It showed, there were a couple of places where it showed practice experiments involving pictures. So it did have a little bit of reality, but by and large, there was essentially nothing that made any real direct connection to Stargate. Now we did get publicity out of it, and people became curious. What is remote viewing? What is Stargate? And this led to, at least for me and some of my colleagues, it led to a degree of visibility. I was on various talk programs, interviewed for my commentaries, and it led to an interest in some of my activities. And I was able to actually then present the movie in its proper context, where there was a bit of reality, but by and large, where it was really an extrapolation, and that had nothing to do with goats. But it was an interesting connection. But beyond that, it was not valid.
So there was never a moment where you studied the ability to kill something by staring at it?
No.
And there was never a goat?
No. I don't quite know what stirred that one up, but I think there was a rumor from another element in the Army. And of course, there are goats that will fall over when you stare at them or really clap your hands. They're called falling goats or sleeping goats. They slip into some kind of narcotic state or some kind of narcolepsy. And there is a goat that does that. Now, whether or not that got mixed up with this, and I have no idea, but it was an interesting storyline, and it followed something that might have happened, but not in the context of staring at it until it falls over dead. So all I could do was make the comments relative to the Stargate and what we did there, and why there was no correlation other than in a few places in terms of experiments, practicing proficiency, and the background to how the government, at least from the point of view of the Air Force, became interested in the program in remote viewing. That did track reality, and this is kind of where I became more directly connected then with the program, with the television program. And that was a time when I wrote a technical paper when I was with the Foreign Technology Division in Dayton, Ohio, part of the Air Force. When I wrote a paper on Soviet ESP that I'd found in the technical literature. And it was that paper that actually helped gain attention to remote viewing and helped us to help the government. It helped me at the time become directly involved as a contract manager. So and that little scene was enacted in a crude way in that movie, but not quite the way it happened in reality. But it was represented, so I could go along with that. So that's sort of my involvement with the commentary on the men who stare at goats. Interesting, not very realistic, but entertainment, yeah, okay, up to a point. It was kind of, some parts of it were kind of really silly, but that's showbiz. that's entertainment. Well, you had asked about some of the experiences. Oh yeah, there were quite a few that really made me. When I first became involved, I really wasn't sure if this remote viewing, as defined by the researchers, was really valid or not. I thought, well, maybe they have something, but is it really as good as they claim, and is it as repeatable as they claim? So I set up quite a few projects to really take a look at that. And now we couldn't do a solid statistics on this, but we had to then look at correlations. How closely did the material match, and have some degree of statistical work. But one of the most intriguing ones that I was directly involved in was trying to perceive pictures that were on board a submarine or a deep diving vessel as targets for remote viewing, at the same time or a similar time when the remote viewers in the deep diving vessel describe distant scenes 500 miles away. So these two versions, can a remote viewer or a side dreamer pick up enough information from a picture that's concealed, not even observed by anybody, out of a random stack of photos inside a steel submarine, submersible, 500 miles away, 500 feet deep? Can a picture be described accurately? And similarly, can somebody on the submarine describe a scene accurately at that distance? And the results that we had were good. We showed that this could be done. And this particular experiment actually demonstrated very clearly to us, looking at it from a physics point of view, that electromagnetics could not have explained those results, because the salt water that deep would actually have blocked out any electromagnetic signal. So that was an experiment I thought was really quite good. Now, from the point of view of applications, yeah, I've been involved in some really interesting ones, startling ones, in fact. And one of them involved locating a missing airplane. It was a Soviet-built airplane that was missing in Africa. And given only really, actually no information other than there's an airplane missing somewhere, with a picture of the airplane, a remote viewer make a sketch that we later learned was within just about a mile and a half of where the airplane crashed. Now, of course, we had to then take her sketch material compared to the search area, which was a 200 by 200 mile grid. And within that 200 by 200 mile grid, she came up with a spot that was based on her impression of terrain features and path and where the lakes were, where the mountains were, whatever. And with a spot on the map, the X on the map, we found out later that that's where it was. So that was a very exciting project, and that was probably one of the ones that got me the most attention at that stage in my early connection with remote viewing. Now, later on, I became involved in other projects that were equally fascinating. In fact, everyone was. Some of them were more dramatic than others, like searching for a hostage or a fugitive. People that were, when we had a connection with the Customs Department, and we're looking for drug cautious or fugitives that were on the run from the DEA, from the Drug Enforcement Agency. And we were actually, in one situation, we actually had enough sufficiently accurate information that local police were able to find the individual. So these were some of the more satisfying activities that I was directly involved in. And of course, there were others too, having to do with anticipating future Soviet developments and providing sketches of what was inside a building, and then later finding that that's what was in there. And it was sort of like an alert, be on the lookout for something like this, because it's coming out of this building. And sure enough, there it was. So these are the kinds of situations that we had, and you can see it's quite varied, and it goes from trying to locate someone or something to anticipating what's or perceiving, I should say, what's inside a building. And of course, our conventional satellites can only see the outside of the building, although that, I guess, there's some technology that can do a little bit more penetrating these days.
Can you explain the process of remote viewing?
Yeah, it's the basic process. It's not difficult. It's a matter of relaxing, focusing on intent. And in the early days of the program, we did not have a complex procedure. It was a matter of building confidence in yourself, allowing yourself to do this, not being concerned whether you're right or wrong. So there's a lot of psychology here. So once you got past that, then the steps were, okay, I desire to describe this distant scene, however it's designated. Somebody might be there looking at it, or it might be in a concealed envelope somewhere in another building, whatever, or it might be given some abstract reference. But nobody knows at that point what the site is, or the picture, or whatever. And then you relax. And the way we did it was to, in the laboratory, was to sequester the remote viewer in this room with nothing else in the room. Get out all the telephone lines, get all the pictures off the wall, make sure it's as sound isolated as possible inside the main room. And then just have the individual sit at a table, just relax and write out the task and then keep repeating the thought. I desired to access the target area or the target picture. And sometimes, well, initially there was an interviewer that prompted the individual to do this, who had no knowledge of the target. So between this approach of somebody being present prompting, or somebody going independent and solo later, the procedure was really straightforward. Sit down, relax, go through the process of saying desire to perceive information at the target, and then await impressions. And the impressions could be either a flash of imagery, if you happen to be visual oriented, or it could be just an impulse to write, sort of kinesthetically, or a thought. Whatever the information was that came, you would then write it down, jot it down. And we found that was the key to this whole process. You record these bits and pieces, and don't make any evaluation or judgment as to what it is you're perceiving. Because once you do that, then you start going into an interpretation, and then your analysis goes haywire. And then before long, you're not actually listening to this inner prompting, these inner impressions. What you're doing is analyzing it and filling in the blanks from memory or imagination. So we had to cut that, minimize that aspect of subconscious processing, which is tough to do. But once you get past that, then you start putting the pieces together, and then after the session is over, as we call it, have everything documented. If you have 2 or 3 pages of sketches, whatever, and document that copy. And then take the individual out to the place that was the intended target for this phase called feedback. And so it's kind of a learning thing. You can see what was right and what was wrong about the perception. So that's sort of a run-through of how we did that. And a little bit of trial and error. In fact, probably a lot of trial and error here. But there are some basic concepts. And that's simply setting the intention and the goal that you can do this, and then staying with it and not be discouraged. Sometimes it would take quite a few trials before a glimmer of progress started coming through. Once in a while, somebody would do it immediately, but then nothing would happen for a bunch of times. So it's everyone is different in how this occurs, but the basic concept was allow yourself for this to happen. It's a friendly environment. Nobody's going to make criticism of you if you're wrong. It's okay to fail. It's okay to be successful. So we had to set up the right psychological environment, which is really important. Sometimes in these parapsychology laboratories, it's too confrontational. The researcher will just plunk people down there and say, okay, do it. Well, it's sort of not a good way to do things in any field. So, particularly something like this, where there's so much subconscious activity going on. So what I've described here is just a basic concept. And later, a protocol, more of an extensive step-by-step protocol procedure was developed. So, in my view right now is that it's either or. Some people are more comfortable with the more basic researchy approach that I just described. Others are more comfortable with having a step. Do this step, then you're ready for this, and you go this, then you go this. and it can be a more complex way of looking at the process. It works for some people, but not every project would be amenable to this approach. There are some times when you don't want to do remote viewing. You want to rely on your intuition because you don't have time to sit down and do all this. I've had some connection off and on with law enforcement people, and I can see that in order for this technology, if you will, to hand over to law enforcement, we really need to start with the intuitive stuff first. That's really where they need it. They don't have time to sit down in a closed room and take 30 minutes to describe a distant scene. Although for some people this will be useful, particularly if you're looking for a missing person or a weapon, that would be useful in this case.
I have, interestingly enough, I may not have asked this question normally, but I have a CIA profiler on the show in 2 days.
Okay, that's great.
And she wrote a book called How Our Gut Feelings Betray Us.
Okay.
In other words, our intuition betrays us.
Yeah, okay.
So asking you this question, how reliable is the intuition?
I'd say it's very reliable, and I like to listen to that because I could probably offer different opinions. Now, what my understanding is, and there's another book out called Blink, B-L-I-N-K, which pretty much makes the same assertion. The gut feeling will betray you if you allow your emotional stuff that's on the top layer of your mind overrule. Then it will betray you. But in the remote viewing approach, what you're doing is getting that out of the way. And this is where the emotional overlays come in. And this is where it's kind of hard to do. In the field, when some people will say, "Oh yeah, I had a gut feel and I did this and it was wrong." They didn't take that little extra step, stop, pause, and get the stuff out of the way. And they called it a gut feel when it was still mixed up with their emotion that they couldn't detach from the raw pieces of data coming in at the psi level. So I can see where for the CIA profiler, I would take some exception to the conclusion that she might reach, because you're looking at a limited way in which gut feelings are pursued and described. And I'm talking about the deeper intuitive feelings. So I don't even use the word gut feeling in this work, in what I do. I call it intuitive feelings. So the two different levels here. And it's very easy to say, "Hey, I had an intuition," and mean it was a gut feeling, be wrong. So that happens. You can see that in romance a lot. Somebody, "Oh, this is the wonderful soulmate. This is the person for me," and then a little later, "Oh, why did I do that?" So you have other things here that detracted from what I would say is the more fundamental truth of the situation.
It sounds like it's the ego.
Yeah, it's
in the true Freudian sense, ego.
You're right, it is. And gut is not an easy term to define, and that gets almost more to what like you said, it's your ego forcing yourself, and you interpret it as a true, deeper intuition. Mm-hmm. So some of this is a terminology mishmash here. I know that, but I'm saying I'm not trying to take anything away from the CIA profiler's findings. I think they're probably very valid, but you should go beyond this and should look at the whole range of what is intuition, what is psi, what is a premonition. So when you take that out, when you move it back to a more neutral plane where there's a little bit more time, and even in the police situations that I've been familiar with, if the individual, before entering, say, a SWAT encounter, the individuals that just take a few moments to calm down, they're the ones that will be the survivors, and not the ones that are ready to go charging in and whatever their gut feel tells them. So there's a difference here about how we approach now.
So clearly, rational decisions
Yeah.
start from a place of relaxation.
Yeah, it's sort of a common denominator here. You have to find a place where you sort of get yourself out of the way, get the excitement down, calm down, you know. And and this is tough to do in a shoot and point situation, or when you're in the field and there's not a lot you can do, but respond. But with the proper conditioning and training, you can get around this, and you will be able to choke off those erroneous gut feeling impressions, and allow only hopefully allow only the pertinent one to enter. Now there are exceptions. There's always exceptions to this stuff. And I know this is the one where I would have to speak from personal experiences here. I was in a situation one time where I had an impulse to take an act, to do something. And I decided, no, I'm not going to do it. And then a moment or two later, the impulse was so strong, I had to do it, which I did against logical understanding. And it turned out to be the correct decision. It was actually a life-saving decision. So here was a case where it was a combination, a gut feel. No, it can't be. And then a recorrection to an impulse, which was beyond gut feel. I wouldn't even want to give the word gut feel credit for that. It was not a gut feel. It was something that came in at a higher level and bypassed and all that. It sort of fit together, but not the way I thought it would, and ended up, fortunately, impulsively doing the right thing. But a lot of impulses are not in our best interest. That is for sure.
Can we use any of this for sports gambling?
This is an issue that comes up a lot, and in the sports arena, there's so many variables. There's a lot of emotion and ego in there, and I'm aware of a series of experiments that was done years ago using remote viewing for the stock market. Mm-hmm. And the first 10 sessions, with money being put on the line, I don't know if it was 9 out of 10 or all 10, but anyway, they were successful, and they made a bundle on it. But the conditions were that this is experimental, and the conditions were that whatever they would win would be contributed to some charity, which they did. So then the investor came around and said, okay, this time to do it with a sharing. We're not going to give it to anyone other than divvy it up ourselves. And in this case, under identical conditions other than this condition, this betting condition, I think only 1 or 2 projects succeeded, so they lost. So what this is telling me is that there was, for this type of situation, which turned more or less into a kind of like a gamble, what was the purpose of it? So the purpose shifted from something that's altruistic to something that's personal, and it didn't work out that well. And I think this is a lot of what happens if you go to Las Vegas and try to apply this. There will be times in the short run it may work, but in the long run, your own self gets in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's what, when you say they gave the money away, the profits to some notable charity, that sort of exonerates the conscience from doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
So I would think that would relax the remote viewer. If there is a guilt associated with it, that would probably destroy your abilities.
Or at least distort it,
Exactly, and that would affect your results.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's an ethical issue here per se, but it is something related that affects our ability to function at the optimum level.
I think it just could be a degree of focus.
Yeah, it could be, but I think it's deeper than that. Mm-hmm. Now, every now and then I hear a case where an individual that's really, really needy for something, it will end up winning big, and even in the lottery. So you cannot make
I mean, those are some interesting implications of what you're sort of saying there. I mean, now you're getting back to the the divine intervention.
Yeah, it's something like that. You know, maybe I don't know if the word divine is the best word here, but something that has a way of determining an overall goodness. If there is, then I think there is something like this collective unconscious. Then, in addition to just simply storing information, there is judgments made here where they need to be made. For example, everything that you and I or anybody else really wants, and we hope, even maybe some people will even pray for it, it may not happen. Okay, so what's going to happen? What caused that? Was it because our perception was very limited and have the picture that's available from this larger collective unconscious or matrix, and then what we thought would be good was good for somebody else? So a judgment, a collective thing came in and prevented the one desire from being met. You know, I'm just speculating here. I have no idea. But you know, these are just words I can use to find a way to, in my own mind, to understand that without going too far into the metaphysics, which I don't mind doing. But I have to relate to scientific groups, and I have to watch language that might be acceptable to them. So a lot of my own personal opinions are just that. You know, I'm not going to go too public with them.
I understand. So the Project Stargate at some point got shut down.
Yes.
Why did the government shut down the
project? Oh, there's some really complex issues here. First, we're lucky to have survived as long as we did, and we had some really good supporters at congressional levels for many years, and they just happened to be, it's a synchronistic thing. The right people are in the right place at the right time. And of course, people move on, people retire, people take other jobs. And the ones that came in were not nearly as open to this topic, or they didn't perceive what we were doing as being a direct help. They were not convinced that it was contributory. We never said this was the only thing to do. You know, this is like any piece of intelligence. It's a part of the whole picture. It's not here to solve the whole thing. So they failed to understand that. Or they did not take a close look at what we did do and ignored the good stuff, which is kind of what happened toward the end there. And then certain directors came into place that really didn't want this, and the Cold War had ended, so to speak, and there was no clear need for this type of, at least according to them, for this kind of thing. And it was a bureaucratic thing. It wasn't clear where this activity should be because it overlapped into other people's domains. I could go on and on and on. It just ran out. It ran out of support. And the problems that we were working on maybe weren't the best for how to best apply the phenomenon. Some of the people were retired and retiring. So it was.
Your audio went just in the last 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, what? Okay. Are we okay now?
Yeah, we're better now. Okay,
fine, okay.
Sorry, carry on your thought. Yeah.
I can't give any one given reason. One of the biggest ones, though, was when the program was reviewed in the latter phase of its history, not all the good stuff was included in that review. So it was sort of a disadvantage to look at only the last few years of the activity and not look at the overall span of the program, including some of the research activities. It's interesting enough, the research part was not criticized nearly as severely as the operational side, the part where we're actually trying to apply this stuff. So it was sort of a backhanded way of saying you have a phenomenon. We just don't know what to do with it, something like that.
And nowadays they have drones, and why make any kind of real efforts?
Yeah, that's something like that. Yeah, and in fact, I know one time, one of the projects I was involved in, we actually used the drone to help validate or invalidate our results. So the material technology could be an augment if we work together. But we were hoping at the time that this could be a trend in the future for because that didn't work out. But we've always made the point in the program that this is just a part of things. Everything else, all the other tools that intelligence has, all of this is going to be integrated together. And this could be just really one piece of it, just like in police work. That's basically how it should be approached in using psychics, if you want to use that term, in police work. They're not the ones solving it. It's the detectives and policemen. This is just one possible input, a bunch, and whatever the requirement is, whatever needs to be determined. Is it finding somebody, a body, a weapon, or whatever, or even reconstructing the crime scene? You know, these are useful add-ons that I think police work is missing by not considering this option.
Dale, you've written 2 books, Tracks in the Psychic Wilderness and River Dreams. Now, of course, these are books about many of the things that we've already discussed today.
Yes, it touches on them, right. It's written more from an experiential point of view. I do have some program stuff in it. When I wrote them and published them, gosh, it's been 10 years now. A lot of the material had yet not been released, so I couldn't go into too much of the Stargate program, but I did include some projects, and I mentioned 1 or 2 of them here on with you. But a lot of the material in the book is some of my own experiments with local people that were under controlled conditions, so I could get the results. And even some of my own dream-like experiences, which get into the lucid dream world, and how that actually overlapped in a few cases with one of the Stargate projects. So, and I also have sections in the books on remote viewing. That's the basic approach, what I described earlier, not the more complex one, which is being used currently by many. I talk about dreaming. And I talk about synchronicity, and these are topics we've discussed already. And I have appendix material in the book that summarizes really basic approaches to these 3 major activities that I've been involved in.
Are these books still available?
Some of them still are out of print. The publisher shifted, and things kind of up somewhere. They're out of print, but some of them are still available through Amazon.com.
You know, there's going to be a lot of people interested in this stuff, so pick up River Dreams or Tracks in the Psychic Wilderness by Dale Graff. And I
want to get them republished once I get some of the copyright straightened out. So anyway.
Well, you should. I think they'll be incredibly successful.
Yeah, these are published in hardback, and I think there are some versions in paperback that are floating around. But there are some available. I'm almost certain that Amazon has an inventory. There are not many, but there are some out there.
Yeah, well, people will be able to find a used one at this point.
Right.
Dale, what's your website?
www.dalegraff.com. I'll spell that. DALEGRAFF.com.
DaleGraff.com.
Yeah, that's it.
And of course, there'll be a link on westcoasttruth.com to your
website.
Great. Dale Graff, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's always enjoyable to go into these things and to listen to what I have to say.